The continuous conflict between Tammy and Amy and the outcome of her life-altering surgery continue to be the main topics of conversation. Since the two sisters' relationship is growing more complex every day, everyone in the family is highly concerned about this issue. A lot of people believe that Amy will significantly alter her life. Tammy might find it difficult to accept this shift. Many others, however, contend that the issue is not that complex and that these theories are wholly incorrect. However, Tammy's desire to alter her life is evident. She wants to make a new beginning, get better, and go on. The family as a whole hopes that the two sisters will work out their differences and reestablish their lovely bond. Even after the operation, when the doctor smiled and told her that she had survived something extraordinary, Tammy realized that the hardest part of change was not the physical transformation, but the emotional storm that followed. This is because healing a body was one thing, but healing a life, healing a family, and healing a broken relationship with the one person who had always been closest to her was something completely different. Tammy's life-changing surgery was supposed to be the moment that finally opened a door she'd been staring at for years, a door that always seemed locked by pain, fear, struggle, and the heavy weight of everything she had been through. Because Tammy's surgery was more than just a medical event, it was a symbol, a turning point, a moment that forced everyone to face how much had been lost and how much could still be saved. For weeks, the entire family had been discussing Tammy in whispers in kitchens, quietly on porches, and exchanging anxious glances during family dinners. At the center of all that tension stood Amy, her sister, her lifelong companion, and now, somehow, her greatest source of conflict. Since love in their family was never quiet or simple, rather, it was messy, noisy, and full of frustration, and Tammy had always known that Amy was there no matter how complicated things got. Amy had always been the loud one, the emotional one, the sister who carried her heart on her sleeve, and she had fought alongside Tammy for years, pushing her, supporting her, crying for her, and occasionally even yelling at her. Nobody could deny that something had changed recently, that something had broken between them. One evening, as she sat in her room at the rehabilitation center, Tammy stared out the window at the sunset painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. She wondered how she could feel so proud of herself for surviving, for changing, and for taking charge, but also feel so alone at the same time, because Amy wasn't there that day, and her absence felt louder than any argument they had ever had. Their rivalry had begun softly, like a tiny flame that went unnoticed until it grew into an inferno. It started with small things, like remarks that seemed harsher than they ought to have been, times when Amy appeared aloof, and times when Tammy appeared defensive because she was changing. Even positive change may be frightening to those who are accustomed to the previous iteration of you, since Amy's identity had been so closely linked to Tammy's struggle, to being the sister who helped, stayed, and never left. And now, all of a sudden, Tammy was changing into someone stronger and less in need of saving. Amy had been harboring inner fear that she was unable to express aloud. Amy was more afraid of that than she cared to acknowledge. When Amy finally paid Tammy a visit one evening, she entered her room with a fake smile and a small bag of snacks, acting as though nothing was wrong. However, Tammy could see right through it, as sisters are always aware. Amy whispered, "You look different," in an odd, almost uncertain voice. Tammy gave a slow nod. "I am unique." Something complex, a mixture of pride and sorrow, flashed in Amy's eyes. Amy muttered, "That's good," but her voice lacked conviction. After weeks of silence, Tammy let out a sigh, her patience wearing thin. "What gives the impression that you don't believe that?" Amy stopped. Amy answered, "I do believe it," a little too hastily. "Tam, I'm not sure. Everything seems strange." Tammy's tone sharpened. "Strange since I'm at last feeling better? Strange since I'm no longer stuck?" Amy's face turned red. "I didn't mean to say that. Not because Tammy despised Amy, but because she loved her too much to tolerate this distance." Her chest constricted and her fury increased. "So, Amy, what do you mean? Because you don't seem to be happy for me. It seems as though you're retreating." Amy's hands shook a little. "I'm not going to back down. Simply put, I'm afraid." Tammy blinked. "What are you afraid of?" For a moment, the room felt heavy with years of whispered truths as Amy swallowed hard. With her voice quivering, Amy confessed, "I'm afraid you're going to abandon me." I'm afraid that when you start this new life, I'll be standing here, unchanged, still having difficulties, and you won't need me anymore." Tammy was taken aback when she looked at her sister because she had anticipated feelings of resentment, rage, and jealousy, but not this intense fear. Tammy whispered, "I don't want to leave you behind, Amy. I want you to be with me." Amy wiped her eyes and laughed sadly. "However, others claim that you will completely transform everything. People are predicting that Amy will also change, that the two of you will be different." Slowly, Tammy shook her head. "People talk too much. They have no idea what it's like to be us." The ensuing quiet was honest, but it was also brittle. With her voice quivering with emotion, Tammy extended her hand. "I wish to begin anew," Tammy said. "I wish to make things better for myself. I want to go on. However, I would rather not do anything without my sister." For a brief moment, Amy resembled the younger Amy who used to clasp Tammy's hand when the world felt too heavy as she gazed at her palm. She reached out and took it slowly. "I'm missing you," Amy said. Tears welled up in Tammy's eyes. "I also miss you because change is strong and sometimes the people closest to you find it difficult to adapt." The family had been frightened outside that room, muttering about how tough things were getting and whether the sisterly relationship could withstand this upheaval. However, at that silent moment within that chamber, Tammy and Amy started to realize something significant. Anger was not actually at the heart of their feud. It has to do with dread, fear of being parted, fear of being alienated, fear of the consequences of having to grow up in life. Tammy gave Amy's hand a light squeeze. Tammy declared, "We can rebuild. We can resume our lovely connection. However, we must stop resisting the change and begin embracing it collectively." Amy nodded slowly, her eyes now streaming down her cheeks. "That's what I want," she muttered. "I want to keep us intact." Through her tears, Tammy gave a quiet smile. She said, "Then we won't be." Additionally, the future didn't feel like a battleground for the first time in a long time. It seemed like a start. Because even though Tammy's surgery altered her physical appearance, what really mattered was that it also altered her heart, guiding her toward a new life free from the constraints of the past, one in which she could at last start over, make improvements to her circumstances, and go on and, hopefully, eventually bring her sister with her, not as a rival or an enemy, but as family, as love, as the person who had always been most important. Every member of the family secretly harbored the same hope, that the two sisters would work out their differences. They eventually returned to one another. Since she had spent so many years living in a body that felt like a prison, Tammy had been waiting for this day for years. She woke up every day with the excruciating emotional burden of knowing that everyone around her, including strangers and even some family members, frequently viewed her as someone who would never truly change, never truly escape, and never truly become the person she secretly wished she was deep inside her heart. Tammy had not felt hope in a long time when the doctors finally told her that the surgery was possible, but she was also afraid because she knew that although the surgery could change her life, it could also reveal the parts of her soul that were still broken and wounded. She was afraid of what would happen if she succeeded because success can sometimes bring with it new expectations, jealousy, and loneliness that can be just as heavy as failure. There was tension in the air because everyone knew that Tammy's transformation would not only affect Tammy but also Amy and the delicate relationship between the two sisters, which had already been deteriorating for years due to resentment, miscommunication, and unsaid pain. The entire family had gathered around Tammy in the weeks leading up to the surgery, trying to support her, smile, and act strong. Amy, who had always been Tammy's best friend, was now in a state of emotional confusion because although she wanted Tammy to succeed, she also couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in her chest that Tammy's new beginning might somehow leave Amy behind. It was as though Amy's identity had always been linked to being the stronger sister, the caretaker, and the one who was needed. And Amy wasn't sure who she would become if Tammy no longer needed her in the same way. When Tammy eventually made it back home after the surgery, it was clear that she had changed. Her face had changed, her body was gradually getting smaller, her movements had become lighter, and for the first time in years, there was a spark in her eyes that suggested she was starting to believe in herself. However, Amy was uneasy about this spark. not because Amy wanted Tammy to fail, but rather because Amy was worried about how her independence would affect their relationship. Because people love transformation stories, miracles, and seeing someone rise from the bottom, the town became enamored with Tammy's results very quickly. However, what they failed to realize was that Tammy's greatest struggle was not the weight she had lost, but rather the emotional weight she was still carrying. This is because healing the body is one thing, but healing the heart, especially when family wounds are involved, is quite another. Tammy started to spend more time by herself, thinking about her future, and envisioning a life in which she could travel, meet new people, and feel normal at last. However, every time she experienced joy, she also felt guilty because she wondered if Amy was struggling, feeling abandoned, or suffering in silence, and she wasn't sure how to bring up the subject without provoking another argument. Amy, on the other hand, was also undergoing changes of her own because she had begun to consider making a big decision that would drastically alter her life. Many people thought Amy was going to do something bold, drastic, and shocking to everyone, but Amy kept it a secret because she knew Tammy was emotionally fragile and didn't want Tammy to feel that Amy was taking attention away from her while she was recovering. Instead of starting with a single altercation, the sisters' feud started with 1,000 little incidents because sometimes relationships end gradually due to miscommunication, silent jealousy, weariness, and years of emotional baggage that no one ever fully resolves. During a family dinner one evening, Tammy sat at the table with a courteous smile, trying to enjoy the moment, but Amy kept observing her. Amy's gaze was complex, containing both love and fear, and Tammy sensed that something was off despite Amy's false pretenses. At last, Tammy murmured, "Amy, why do you look at me like that?" in a steady but tremulous voice. "Because I don't recognize you anymore, Tammy, and I don't know where I fit in your life now," Amy said as she hesitated, unwilling to acknowledge the truth that was blazing within of her. After years of feeling invisible, and that the family only regarded her as a burden, those comments hit Tammy like a ton of bricks. For the first time, she was told that her growth was frightening someone else, and Tammy wasn't sure if she should be upset or upset. "So you wanted me to stay the same forever?" Tammy's voice soared. "So you could feel needed? You wanted me to remain trapped?" "No, Tammy, I wanted you to live, but I didn't expect to feel like I was losing my sister in the process," Amy yelled back as her eyes welled with tears. Everyone could see that this was about two sisters who loved each other very much, but had never learned how to grow together rather than grow apart. So the family went silent. It was not about gossip, weight, or surgery. The tension increased after that night because Amy began to feel that Tammy was pushing her away, and Tammy began to feel that Amy was emotionally holding her back. The more they avoided one another, the more difficult it got for them to have even basic talks. Outsiders seldom get the truth because family love is messy, complex, and often unbearably painful. Many people in the town began spreading accusations that Amy was envious, that Tammy was now conceited, and that the sisters would never get better. Even if Amy drove her crazy, she was still her sister, her blood, and a part of her story. So Tammy would lie awake at night and stare at the ceiling, wondering if her new life was worth losing the person who had supported her through everything. Even though Amy felt Tammy deserved happiness, she couldn't help but feel scared since change can feel like abandonment if you don't know how to handle it. Amy would cry quietly in her own home, feeling bad about her feelings. The family attempted to step in by sitting them down and pleading with them to speak. But forgiveness and healing cannot be hurried since Tammy and Amy had to face their inner truths before they could fully face one another. When Tammy eventually stepped outside by herself one day, she felt the sun on her face, took a big breath, and realized that her path was about more than just losing weight. It was about learning to love yourself, to live, and to stop using conflict to define her value. In the distance, Amy watched her with a heavy heart, realizing that Tammy was not her enemy, but rather her sister, and that their shared dread of change, of losing one another, and of becoming strangers was their true enemy. Since Tammy's surgery had altered her life, the question was no longer whether it had, but rather whether she and Amy could reconcile before their complex relationship ended permanently. Because sometimes losing your physical attributes isn't the most difficult aspect of change. Hello, lovely viewers. Welcome to my channel. My name is Mina, and I hope you're having a great day. It's what you risk losing from your heart. Remember to subscribe to the channel if you enjoy the video.